All right, hey guys, today we're going to talk about carbohydrates. If you take a look at the word, you see hopefully carbo for carbon and hydrate for water. So now you're thinking carbon C, water H2O, CH2O. All right, and that is going to be the empirical formula for your simple sugars. So they're made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and the hydrogen to oxygen ratio is going to be the same as water, 2 hydrogens for every oxygen. Okay, the main function of carbohydrates is going to be for energy storage. So if you think about when you are eating food and you need quick energy, carbohydrates are the way to go. Simple sugars would be the way to go if you need quick energy. If you need long-term storage of energy, you're then going to be looking at something like a starch. Okay? But the carbohydrates can also be structural. So thinking about plant cells, okay, the structures that surround plant cells are called cell walls. Those cell walls are made up of a structural carbohydrate called cellulose. Now, one thing that you can notice as we move through the next few slides is that carbohydrates tend to have an ending that is OSE, and that's going to be one way that you can identify a carbohydrate from some other type of organic macromolecule. All right, so here we're looking at the 3 different types of carbohydrates. We've got monosaccharides. Remember that mono means one, and saccharide basically means sugar. We've got disaccharides, so you've got 2 saccharides or 2 sugars together. And then we've got polysaccharides, and these are going to be large molecules like starches, where you have a bunch of individual units put together. So taking a look at the monosaccharides, if you recall from an earlier lecture, we're going to have carbons at all of these intersections between these lines here. So glucose, remember the OSE ending, actually has 6 carbons. There's 1, that would be 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Then you go through and you count up the hydrogens, you should come up with 12, and then oxygens, you'll have 6. So the formula for all 3 of these is C6H12O6. Since they all have the same formula, but notice they have a different arrangement of atoms, if you look at the 3 shapes, they are different, especially the fructose here, which has a 5-sided shape. Glucose and galactose are very similar. For this one, you need to notice that the carbon 4 right here, the OH and the H arrangements are a little bit different. So because these have the same formula and a different arrangement, they are called isomers. So that's the definition of an isomer, is chemical compounds that have the same formula but a different arrangement of atoms. Now we can put these 3 different types of monosaccharides together in different orders through a process called dehydration synthesis, which we've mentioned in the macromolecules lecture. And what's going to happen is we will get disaccharides. So if we put glucose and fructose together, that's 2 monosaccharides. That would end up making a disaccharide. Or we can put glucose and galactose together and get a different disaccharide. So speaking of that process, here we have sucrose, lactose, and then maltose. But notice over here on the side, we've got them broken down, and you can see that sucrose is made up of glucose and fructose, lactose is made up of galactose and glucose, and then maltose is made up of 2 glucose molecules. Notice here we have the oxygen bridge in the middle, and what we would have done there is we would have had to have removed a molecule of water. Remember, that process is called dehydration synthesis. Now if you take a look at these molecules, you should notice that there's one molecule that they all have in common. And in this case, it's going to be glucose. So you see here's glucose, here is glucose, and then this one actually has 2. Not only that, you should be able to count up the atoms of each of the elements. And remember that the elements that they have are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And if you take a look, remember, at the junctions, you're going to have carbons. Okay, so if you have that, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 carbons. That's going to actually be the same for all three. Then you go through and you count the number of hydrogens. You should come up with 22, and you should come up with 11 oxygens. So remember that the ratio of hydrogen to oxygen is 2 to 1, 22 hydrogens and 11 oxygens for each of these molecules. So on our last slide, we talked about how the monomers were all isomers of each other because they had the same chemical formula, but a different arrangement of the atoms. And this is the same here because these all have the same formula, C12H22O11, but they have a different arrangement of atoms. So let's take a look at the process of dehydration synthesis. So here we have a glucose and a fructose. Okay, this is going to create a sucrose molecule. But notice here, we've got OH and H in red. Okay, what's going to happen there is we are going to remove the H and the OH, which is going to form a molecule of water. And the resulting molecule that is produced is going to be a sucrose molecule. Now, remember we called this an oxygen bridge. But when we bond a sugar to something, okay, it has a special name, and that's going to be called a glycosidic bond. Remember, glyco or glucose is a sugar. Moving on to polysaccharides, here are 4 different examples of polysaccharides. The 2 at the top, cellulose and starch, are found in plants. The 2 at the bottom are going to be found in animals, and in some cases, for example, chitin, that's going to be found in fungi. Okay, it will also be found in animals. Cellulose is going to be the sugar, the polysaccharide, that is found in the cell walls of plants. So this is going to be a structural polysaccharide. Starch is going to be your energy storage compound. Okay, so starch is really nothing more than a bunch of glucose molecules bonded together through the process of dehydration synthesis. And these are only small parts of all of these molecules. Okay, glycogen is going to be how animals store their excess sugar. Okay, and again, if you take a look at the molecules, they look very similar. Okay, and lastly, chitin is going to be a structural polysaccharide. This is going to be the thing that makes up the exoskeletons of insects and crustaceans, and it's also found in the cell wall of things like fungi. So looking back at these polysaccharides, cellulose and starch are both found in plants. Glycogen and chitin are both found in animals, with chitin also being found in fungi. Cellulose and chitin are structural polysaccharides, whereas starch and glycogen are going to be energy storage compounds. So I hope you guys learned something in today's lecture. Remember, if you have any questions, then all you need to do is shoot me an email or bring the questions up in lecture and we can discuss it there. And other than that, I will see you guys next lecture.